You know, that's what you want.
All right, coming up, we're going to talk about Ontario's economy with one of the big brains down there at Queen's Park. Martin Regg-Cohn from the Toronto Star joins us on Focus Ontario when we come back. Welcome back to Focus Ontario. I'm Alan Carter, in for Leslie Roberts, and we're joined now by Queen's Park columnist for the Toronto Star, Martin Regg-Cohn. Thanks so much for coming in. And I think it was your colleague Rob Benzie who said in the budget lockup to Andrea Horwath, apart from actually putting the picture of Tommy Douglas on the front page of this thing, how possibly could you ask for anything else? But you've had a look at it, and you think that there is something that is missing.
There is something that is missing, and yes, I think it was Rob who actually said that you could have put Tommy Douglas's a picture on the cover of the budget, because it was almost written by them, and I think I wrote the next day a kind of mock column saying that Premier Andrea Horwath was very pleased with her budget and defended it against criticisms of too much spending. But we have focused so much on the politics of this budget. Understandably, it's a minority government. This is do or die for the Liberals, and the remarkable correspondence with what the New Democrats have demanded, as you pointed out, in terms of a kind of a cheat sheet showing every one of the 7.5 demands have been met. The 0.5 being this public accountability office in Ottawa, which came later. But, you know, budgets often pretend to be economic documents, but they're really masquerading as political documents, as we've seen in particular this week. This budget has an unanswered question. It raises the problem to its credit. It spells out what the challenges are for Ontario's economy, and it's quite fascinating, actually. We've heard for a long time that Ontario has challenges with productivity. Our productivity, the output per labor unit, has been on the decline, or has been increasing only by a very modest amount for a couple of decades now. The same with investment in machinery and equipment, which is an important indicator of investment in capital investment. And what we've seen, though, interestingly, is that we are now not just lagging, but we are falling behind an already weak U.S. economy on productivity, on investment, and in R&D spending. And to me, the most worrisome thing in this budget is that the economy of Ontario will grow by only 1.5% in this calendar year. A year ago in the budget, they predicted that for 2013 it would be about 2.2%, I believe. So that's a decline of about 30% in economic growth.
But isn't this a sign of the times too? Because what you've got, we were talking about the fact that the Toronto City Hall, you have them saying, well, no, they've got a jobs plan. Don't worry about a thing. It's a casino, and you're saying to yourself, a casino is a jobs plan? In Ontario, I would say there is probably no jobs plan in that budget. By a jobs plan, I don't mean government manufactured jobs either. I mean somehow deciding on a priority or a strategy or putting incentives in place to encourage some kind of economic activity. And I think you're right, there was nothing in there.
Yeah, there wasn't, and you're quite right that it's painful to see politicians, both at City Hall and also in the Ontario government, saying that casinos are a lever for growth. That's a pretty empty plan. Casinos can't do it. There are limitations to what a government can do, as I think you know. The provincial government can't print money. It can't reduce interest rates any lower than they are already anyway. So there are limited levers for the provincial government. What they can do is set the table for the private sector, and I think the private sector has been letting us down. You know, the governor of the Bank of Canada has complained about the dead money, the $500 billion, or $500 billion, I should say, that was just sitting there, the cash that companies have been accumulating. So the manufacturing sector has to get on with it. We are falling behind. We used to have about 10% of the imports in the U.S. coming from Ontario. We're down to about 5.5%. We've lost about half of our market share in the U.S., and we are nowhere with the other fast expanding markets overseas. We're in trouble.
But let's look at the two opposition plans, because on the left you have the NDP calling for a hike in corporate taxes, and on the right you have the PC saying we're going to slash the public sector workforce and we're going to cut some taxes as well, which to you makes more sense in terms of a jobs plan that you don't see in the Liberal budget.
Sorry, but neither one. And I should add, by the way, that there is actually technically a job creation plan in the budget that applies to young people. That's a good idea because youth unemployment is very high. That's an issue that you've been concerned about, John, in the past. But that's just going to help at the margins. That's just going to help kids get their first foot in the door. It's not going to really grow the economy. It's just going to help put a Band-Aid, I should say, on that thing, but I support that. To the bigger questions of corporate tax cuts or corporate tax increases, I think that's just going to cause more trouble. I think the tax cuts that Mr. Hudak and the Tories are proposing are going to increase the deficit, which we, unless you're a real believer in old Reaganomics, supply-side economics, that if you just keep cutting, somehow tax revenues will increase. I think that's, at this point of the game, a risky proposition. We have a serious deficit problem, which the government is recognizing. And even though they're hoping to reduce a $10 or $11.9 billion deficit by 2017, 4 years from now, our interest payments are going to increase from $10 billion a year to about $14.4 billion. That's a 40% increase in our interest payments. It will become, it already is, in fact, the third biggest sector in which we spend money in this budget. So even though we're reducing the deficit, our accumulated debt is approaching and will soon exceed $300 billion. That's a problem because the next time there is a serious economic crisis, we need to have some money in our kitty to do what needs to be done on an emergency basis.
Well, I think we have to grow our way out of that in part. You can't cut your way back to prosperity. And Sheldon Levy gave a speech this week, the head of Ryerson University, and said, Ontario is not startup friendly. And he cited the example of in Silicon Valley, if you have an idea, you can get a meeting with government people, with other people in business, with banks in 48 hours. Here, you might be lucky if you got a meeting in 8 weeks. And that's part that's not referred to either. That's kind of what we call red tape of a kind. No reference to that in the budget.
No, I think there is a lagging recognition of that. I do think startups get a lot of attention, and they certainly should be encouraged. I'm a big believer in that incubation and so on. You've got the Mars Center. But realistically, that's a long-term bet. And in terms of trying to, our manufacturing sector is in rapid decline. The government of McGuinty tried the Green Energy Plan with mixed results. They claim 30,000 jobs. We'll see, but we're paying a high price in electricity rates. But it's the unanswered challenge we saw in the budget, I think partly under the influence of David Dodge, the former governor of the Bank of Canada, who's advising the government now, exactly how stark those challenges are, how to fix it. I'm not really hearing from the opposition, to your question, Alan, any really constructive ideas about how to move forward. There are some ideas coming from, for example, the Competitiveness and Prosperity Institute, improving R&D, rewarding patents, changing the tax structure so there are fewer tax dodges. But we need to have more of a discussion on that instead of just entirely focusing on the politics of it.
I thought you were going to say another conversation, and I was going to reach right over and throttle you. Martin Ray-Con from the Toronto Star, thank you so much for coming in.
Pleasure.
Stay with us. Focus Ontario returns in just a moment.